Welcome, everyone. Uh, my name is Elaine Stratford. I'm Professor of Geography at the University of Tasmania. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome you to the CityTalks Forum, jointly hosted by the University of Tasmania and the City of Hobart. In this NAIDOC week, we are meeting online across Lutruwita, Tasmania, Aboriginal land, sea, and waterways. And with deep respect, I acknowledge the Palawa people, the traditional owners of this land, which was never ceded. The Palawa people belong to the oldest continuing culture in the world. They cared for and protected country for thousands of years and still do. They knew this land, they lived on this land, they died on this land, and I honor them. I pay my respects to elders, past and present, to the many Aboriginal people who did not make elder status, and to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community who continue to care for country. CityTalks tonight is focused on future-proofing Hobart, community responses to crisis. And the CityTalks Hobart series are public forums which aim to inspire ideas and innovation for Hobart's future. Through a series of webinars and public talks, these events aim to provide a platform for conversation, conversations that build connections and that allow for exchange of ideas and inspire a vision for our future. And who could not sign up to that? Look, a few housekeeping matters. Your microphone, your camera, your chat function, and your raised hand function have all been turned off for this evening to protect your privacy. But we actually really want you to ask questions. And this can be done at any time by typing into the Q&A function that you can see on your screens. You can ask questions anonymously, and we will address these during the Q&A session. We're conducting a couple of polls, one of which you can see on screen now. So please feel free to participate in those as well, because we'd love to know more about who you are and how you feel about the issues that are going to be discussed today. Finally, the lecture is being recorded for later access on our YouTube and SoundClouds, and there'll be more information about that later in the session. So please make use of that and let all your friends know too. Tweet, Facebook, do the whole 9 yards. Now, look, I've been asked, and I'm really delighted, I've been asked to just make a few comments, and knowing that you speak 110 words a minute, there are only a few. So what I'd like to do is try and set the scene. As a doctoral candidate at the University of Tasmania about 1,000,000 years ago, I had the privilege of working with the professor of linguistics, a man named Peter Mulhauser. Pete was an international expert on the languages that we invent to explain our relationship with the environment. It's called green speak. And that work instilled in me a love of the meaning of words, which I still have. Now, our expert panel is going to focus on future-proofing Hobart community responses to crisis. So I'm going to make a few simple observations to set the scene, because going back to basics is powerful. First of all, future-proofing is a compound verb which invites us to act. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, it means to equip oneself to protect against, or in fact, to engage in future developments, to design in a manner that is aimed at preventing rapid obsolescence. But of course, in this context, future-proofing needs to be contextualized in terms of those three other terms: community and response and crisis. And I'm going to take them in reverse order. Crisis describes a vitally important or decisive stage in the progress of anything, actually. It's a turning point and also a state of affairs in which a decisive change, for better or worse, is imminent. And it really applies now, especially in times of difficulty, insecurity, and suspense. If we take this term literally, we are already behind the 8 ball. Doubtless, many crises are beyond our capacity to anticipate, but I would argue that most of them are not. They are not crises in the sense of emergencies, but because we let matters get out of hand. What goes begging there, of course, is that we often don't know what amount of time we have to act until disaster strikes, and we are very good at delay. Response, of course, describes an action or a feeling, but more often than not, it means reaction. Again, if we take that term literally, we remain behind the 8 ball because reacting is not acting with the good sense of precaution. We know, for example, what great regenerative design looks like. We know what cradle to cradle design looks like. We know where our inundation points are. We know where our burn points are. And in terms of individual and collective structures and agencies, we stall, or more generously, we could act more wisely than we have been prone to. Finally, of the 13 definitions of community provided by the Oxford English Dictionary, I want to stick on 2. The first is communities of place, groups who live cheek by jowl and may or may not have anything in common beyond locale. And the second is communities of interest, groups who may or may not live close, but they share common interests. My sense is that we need to enroll both communities of place and communities of interest in our quest for wise actions and not just reactions to crises before us. And we need to think about the future in terms that do not defer those actions, but are based on a clear understanding that now is a fine time as any to start. And so with those emergent thoughts or provocations you might like to take up later, let me introduce our moderator. I'm just delighted to see Jessica Robbins on screen again. I've known Jess for a long time, but I very rarely get to spend any time in her space. She's Programs and Partnerships Manager at the International Council for Local Environment Initiatives Division of Local Governments for Sustainability, Oceania. It's an international network of 2,500 local and regional governments in more than 125 countries that are committed to sustainable urban development. I will leave you with Jessica, and I hope you enjoy this evening's webinar. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Elaine. It's an absolute delight to be here and be with you all this evening. I can see that we've got an amazing diversity of people that have joined us from across Tasmania, across Australia, and even across the world. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And again, thank you for that wonderful introduction and acknowledgement, Elaine. Of course, yeah, future-proofing, how can we prepare to expect the unexpected? How do we apply that in what we do every day? We've got this amazing opportunity today to learn from Jean and Melanie, who are joining us from north of Australia and also New Zealand. And so as we listen to them today, just think about, you know, what is it that you can be doing to help future-proof your life, your business, your community, right? Future-proofing is about everyone taking action so that we're all prepared for future shocks. Anyway, so moving on, I'd really love to take a moment to introduce Melanie Hutton. Now, before I do that, for those of you who have questions, remember to jump onto that Q&A button down the bottom there. Please do ask away, and we'll have an opportunity to reflect those back to Jean and Melanie later in the session. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Melanie Hutton. Melanie was born in Wellington, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and has global experience in developing policies and strategies to deliver environmental and sustainability outcomes. She's also amazing at community-led climate change mitigation and adaptation programs. She's worked for the Auckland Emergency Management for 6 years, assisting and transforming the city's approach to ensure people can equitably and fairly adapt to climate challenges and other disasters. Certainly, we need more Melanies in the world, I think. So she's really passionate about our natural world and how to ensure it is protected and restored alongside human activity. So over to you, Melanie.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for that glowing introduction. So it's certainly my pleasure to join you tonight and contribute my thoughts into this conversation. So, Yapalingina, kia ora and greetings. To follow a selection of my reflections arising from observing and supporting communities who are wanting to strengthen their disaster resilience. I've taken into consideration the engagement challenges that we have both within the 21st century and PC, post-COVID. Me and my team, we stand in the nexus role, we work for local government. And so we're both answerable to central government or federal government in Australia, but we're also answerable down into our communities as well through our local government legislation. So we have quite a few masters that we have to juggle and work with. I suspect that many of the things that I will present to you probably seem really obvious. But I want to remind you that within the emergency management sector, in the Western world, there's been quite a significant shift from quite a control and command and a top-down through to really trying to embrace community-led and community-supported. So I hope these ideas might spark your interest, your curiosity, or maybe your wonder. So the first thing, obviously, is I do want to give my own acknowledgement to the Aboriginal people, past, present and future. And as I'm sure many of you know, we also have our own Indigenous people, the Māori, and we're blessed in Aotearoa to have a treaty with them. And a really key part of any successful disaster preparedness and response is actually forming those strong partnerships and then moving together as one. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a number of the initiatives that we do here in Auckland Emergency Management, which are trying to embrace with Māori for Māori resources, engagements that actually build off their tikanga, their culture, their maturanga, their knowledge, and be led in partnership with them. So a very, very important strength to the work that we do. It's important to recognise, I suppose, challenges. For us, obviously, Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, a significantly large city, immense diversity. And then we have, obviously, the disasters, both climate and not climate induced now, but needing to also walk people along a path of what those are going to become more frequent and more severe. And that's a communication challenge in itself. And then the challenge of scale. This is my team, we're 8. In communities, it's often a few people trying to move things forward. So with those kind of scale challenges in mind, here are some thoughts. The first thing is understanding the role of local government so that as communities, you know how to hook into local government, how to get the very best from the strategies that local government has so you can leverage off that. The next thing is making the 4 R's, risk reduction, readiness, response and recovery, really making them clear, simple, and like an elevator pitch. And this is the elevator pitch that my team does. The next thing is really building on those relationships in order to get the reach. And I cannot stress this strong enough. Without whakawhanaungatanga, without building those relationships, you will not be able to deliver at a household, a neighbour and a community across the 3 types of community, geographical, similar and relational. You will not get the shift and change that you need now. Relevance and receptiveness, obviously we desperately need to make sure that the things we do are relevant to those communities that we engage with. And receptiveness, I hate to say it, but when there is an emergency, that is often the best time for us to do the engagement work. And so being able to scale up and be there for those communities becomes really, really important. Have I got your attention? Trying to communicate through to people when we've all got busy lives is a massive challenge. Gaming tools are really something that we're building into our work. And also being creative in the communities we engage with and being fit for purpose. Scenario exercises, perhaps for the blind, is one of the good examples that is shown here, using QR codes after all our experience with COVID. Knowing when to step aside is another really, really key point. Community is far more resilient and capable and able to respond than we give them credit to in local government and even central. And recognising that, stepping aside but being there when they need is really, really important. Financially being there, and this is definitely a role for local government. Communities can only go so far on a oily rag. But we can be there both before, during and after with grants or resources or training and workshops, bringing our time, our expertise to the table to support communities. And that's really, really important. Well-being, never overlook it. It is probably the most important thing we know in the emergency management sector, to make sure our staff have the tools before, during, and then have recovery time after. And for communities, it's exactly the same. And it absolutely is pivotal to the success and the ongoing resilience of a community when they're doing recovery. This is a couple of challenges out in terms of what to consider when we're talking about the word resilience. A whole lot of both qualities and also questions that we need to be asking ourselves in order to build that resilience. And it's like a touchstone. It's a good thing for us to constantly refer back to. And then to finish off, very, very quick dance through this, but is food. An emergency management sector in a response moves on its stomach. It's more than the wellness, and I can't stress enough the value of community engagement. It's one of the first things we do is we always bring the food in order to get the best outcomes with our communities. So something to consider in our work going forward. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Melanie. I love that you did end on food, as much as there were many highlights through your presentation, but absolutely, truly connecting. And also that community is capable. Really fantastic messages. I would love to introduce you now to Dr. Renouf. And I do apologise if I have said your name a bit wrong. He's the chair of Resilient Byron. He's also an academic at Southern Cross University, a retained firefighter with Fire and Rescue New South Wales, and a father. Prior to this, Jean spent years implementing emergency relief projects in disaster zones and countries at war, including Afghanistan, Congo, Haiti, Iraq, and North Korea. All of these informs his passion for climate change, community regeneration and resilience, and led him to found Resilient Byron. What a history. Resilient Byron is an incorporated not-for-profit charity founded in 2019, which aims to build the resilience and regenerative capacities of the Northern Rivers residents of New South Wales. So over to you, Jean.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you everyone for the opportunity tonight. I'd like to also start by acknowledging the land upon which we all meet from our respective areas, but also say that had we been able to truly care for country, we would probably not be speaking about resilience so much nowadays. With this in mind, I wanted to start quoting the 2020 report, which said, Australia disaster outlook is alarming, and insignificant emergencies and disasters never will have the capability and capacity to solve the emergency threats for every individual at risk. And back in 2019-20, the bushfire risk made very evident that there cannot be a fire truck in front of every house that needs protection. And this is the same that happened after the floods. It was pretty apparent how overwhelmed different institutions, combat agencies, but also local governments, state governments, federal governments were in the height of this large-scale, unprecedented compounding disasters. And to give you a sense, not only water were flowing to unprecedented scales, but also all the system we're familiar on and on which the combat agencies rely were down. So there was no power, no communications, no roads access. There was no food, no drinkable water. There was no cash in the ATM after a few days. So what happened is the northern rivers of New South Wales, which encompasses 7 LGAs areas, there were pockets of communities, having to live by themselves and support each other. And what happened was an extraordinary rise of the community to the occasion, with people taking an unprecedented amount of risks, going on tinnies and kayaks on roofs, but also creating, all sorts of rope and pulley chain systems to carry people, and food across the bridge had been destroyed. And even the army could not go, was actually stopping and said, look, the risks are too high for us, and the community was going. So in this context, it became very apparent that relying on combat agencies, the traditional combat agency was simply done as best as they could, but they too were affected. Their staff, their volunteers were flooded, their capacity were limited, their resources were not necessarily reachable. So obviously the community filled the gap. And in a way, this is not surprising. This is what always happened. Community is always the first responder in any large-scale compounding disaster, whether in Australia or elsewhere. So how can we then build community resilience in a changing climate? We know it's going to happen again. And if anything, it's going to be worse. So what can we do? At Resilient Byron, we're driven by 3 concepts. The first one, and it ties in a bit on what Jessica was saying. The first one is connection, building connection in between individuals, in between neighborhoods, in between communities, as well as social cohesion. And local governments, but all state and federal government can support those initiatives, bringing people together through all sorts of activities. It can be, your yoga club, it can be your parents' association, it can be any activity that brings people together. The second stage is the resilience proper. So organizing the preparedness, the prevention, the risk reduction that Jessica was talking about. So providing trainings, providing resources such as a radio communication system, Starlink satellite systems, but also teaching people how to organize food stock and other stocks. We have seen throughout the flood response that people who have flooded or whose houses had been affected by landslide needed everything, from mattresses to underwears to toothbrush to shoes to anything you can think of in your own house. So preparing for the basic ability for community to respond in advance would allow the community to be even more effective in that sense. Another aspect of the resilience building is the networking aspect. What happened is that we had seen people relying on their previous network. Suddenly people reconnected, with the neighbors, with their familiar strangers, or with the family and friends they hadn't been in touch with for a long time. Colleagues at work supported each other in an unprecedented way. And this general kindness just became obvious. However, community cannot replace, combat agencies or state of any level. It can only complement it. So the other question that needs to be looked at when it comes to resilience is how do we build the interface between community and institutions? And contrary perhaps to the perception, community work and community response is not necessarily chaotic. It may appear like, but anyone who has been in India or any country similar on holidays will know that what appears chaotic is not necessarily if you're able to observe the patterns. And what you observe is actually a huge amount of fluidity, of ability to fill in the gaps, of leadership that is distributed across the network. So it's organized, but not necessarily organized through a top-down approach that we are so familiar with in Australia. And we have to give credit to the community for having been able to self-organize in that sense. So to finish with, after connection and resilience, the third concept that guides us is regeneration. If we had been able to think of future generations while living our own life, we would have not depleted our natural environments. We would not have depleted our resources so much. So thinking, redesigning our different systems, our food systems, our water system, our power systems, our communication systems, our health and education systems, redesigning them in a way which make them resilient, is thinking about future generations, because then we naturally build resilience in the system. So at Resilient Byron, the flagship project we are currently working on is called the Northern Rivers Community Carers and Responders Network, the CCR. And we are currently training more than 100 local residents across the Northern Rivers in community building, in disaster prevention and response, in regeneration. And we also provide them with a day of first aid and psychological first aid. So undertake 5 days of training across 9 months, but they're also interconnected. And as part of the training, they have to lead their own community resilience building project. And of course, we support them through mentoring activities, but also our next stage and following the massive flooding events that have so profoundly affected our communities here is providing some trauma-based informed recovery activities. I'm going to leave it to here. There would be much more to say, but I thank you for the opportunity today.
Thank you so much, Jean. And it's just amazing to hear what you are doing to build the resilience in the Northern Rivers and that wonderful sort of framework that you've been able to offer us as well. So before we jump into the Q&A, we will be diving into the Q&A session. So please do keep questions rolling in via that Q&A button down the bottom of your screen, and then we can ask the panelists to respond to them. So to get things started, I have a question for Melanie. So Melanie, bushfire is the biggest risk facing Hobart. As we plan for more climate change driven weather events, what new strategies do we need to consider to support prevention, preparedness and response at both the community and government level?
I would actually challenge back and say that a lot of the measures that we can take as individuals, households, neighbourhoods or communities are often applicable irrespective of the actual hazard itself. Obviously, there are unique things associated with fire that need to be added into the mix. But if you come back to the principles of know your hazards, risk profile around you, which could include fire, how to mitigate that, which includes fire, and then how to prepare for that residual risk, which within a bushfire stress, obviously there'll be a whole range of unique preparedness things that people can take, plus your social connection, which Jean has mentioned. Then I think you're in a really good place for communities and businesses to actually respond to the specific hazard, i.e. the fire. For us here in Aotearoa, we don't yet have the degree of fire risk as you do in Australia. So we probably have an awful lot to learn from you when it comes to strengthening our literacy around fire risk to our communities.
Thank you so much for that, Melanie. So I have a question from Beck. So it's for Jean. Would you be able to share some of the projects that your team members are leading? It would just be really interesting to learn more about the interesting sorts of things that people are doing.
Yes, of course. And thank you for the question. So I have spoken of one of our current projects with the community carers and responders. I'm not going to speak about that one again, but I can mention another project which we have recently completed in partnership with another not-for-profit called Osgreen. And this one is called Resilient Communities. And we trained local residents in community resilience, but also in facilitation skills. And that project lasted 7 months. And we would meet once a month at the beginning, whereby we would be engaging all of these facilitators in one given topic, let's say food security or climate change or bushfire risk. And we would give them the fundamentals. What do they have to know when it comes to these different topics? But then we would also say month, and we would help bring their community, their own community where they were living in, together and teach that modules to their community in turn, some sort of ripple effect beyond this initial training. And I have to say, I was absolutely humbled by the amount of activities, initiatives, those facilitators, but also the members of their training were undertaking throughout the 7 months to improve their own resilience. So just coming together with like-minded people who are keen to act and prepare their houses, but also redesign perhaps their houses or reorganize the landscaping, looking at how to live more sustainably, getting more power security and food security, etc., collectively led to a multiplication of positive actions in all of these communities, well beyond what we had expected. So that's another project of ours, but I encourage anyone to check our website, resilientbyron.org, to get more inspiration.
Thank you so much, Sean. Wonderful. And so a question for Melanie. Do you have any recommendations for young professionals who are interested in entering the area of natural hazard prevention, response and recovery?
There's been a significant shift in the emergency management sector, I think, across the Western world. And part of that is the professionalisation of it. So there's an awful lot of both university, technical college courses that can be done, but there's also the pathways through both the first responder agencies, if that's what you'd like to do. So doing it as a volunteer, coming through the ranks into paid work. And then there's our sector, I think, is quite mysterious. I don't know if people quite know the breadth of the work we do as both coordinating agencies, but then who else is at the table during a response? And I think it is worth reading some of the strategic documents or even reports that are reflecting on emergencies and their responses and recoveries to really get a sense of the type of organisations that are involved in this work. And it really can be from the, sorry, I don't know if you have them there, SPCA, animal welfare, people welfare, through to GIS mapping, through to, we always need people who can cook food on the barbecue and the logistics side of things, supply chain. So I'm almost inclined to say there's a role for everyone. It's just whether or not you want to be inside the Emergency Coordination Centre coordinating, or do you want to be frontline as first responder, or do you want to have a role within the breadth of community, not-for-profit, state government, central government, or local government? The world's your oyster, really. And I think coming back to the focus of this talk, which is around climate change, there's mitigation and there's adaptation. And if you look at both those aspects and the equity within that, I think there's a place for everybody.
Thank you so much for that, Melanie, as well. And, it's also good to think about, what is the role that you could possibly take, where are your strengths when a disaster does happen. And so if we have that clear in our mind before a disaster happens, you're going to be faster to be able to respond and help out. So a question then for Jean. One aspect of climate change, and this is, sorry, I should have mentioned, this is from Elaine. One aspect of climate change are frequently reoccurring events, as we are seeing with current floods. How do communities recover from continuously recurring disasters?
Look, this is an excellent question. I would say it's $1 million question, really, if you think about it, because that's exactly the sort of questions we need to face and think about it. I would start first by society we live in.
Sorry, so we have had some technical difficulties today through Jean's connection. He does have a backup, so hopefully he'll be able to reconnect. Now, Melanie, not to put you on the spot, but I will. What would your response to that question? Like, how do we deal with these ongoing multiple disasters that are happening? And I'll come back to Jean when he comes back online. Melanie's just going to answer for a moment.
I think John's come back and just saved me from answering. Would you like to continue, John?
Thank you, Melanie, but I just like to jump in again. Yes, what we have seen is first, the unprecedented amount of disaster and crisis, loneliness of epidemics, epidemics of loneliness rather. We have been already in recovery before the large flooding events have affected us. And in this case, we had been hit which has been devastating, for people's psyche. So right now we are the reckoning phase. And I reckon in our region, it's been to go through in order to realize what was happening to us. After the first flood, the mayor and other members of parliament were very clear. We're rebuilding Lismore, among others, where it stands. And that was a clear direction, end of debate. As well, weeks later, we got hit by the fifth larger flood in the history of the town. And that was a reckoning. That was the realization that, okay, we need to start looking at other options, including relocation, including different means to adapt to these large-scale compounding disasters. So the population has been hit hard and is still very much in the recovery phase and will remain so in a couple of years. What absolutely is required here is not only the continuation of existing services, but also the feeling of safety net, of a community safety net. If people can hold each other and connect with each other, this will have far greater positive impacts on people's ability to recover and mental health and well-being than relying on services provided by agencies. So while these are essential, it is only a minority who actually access them. But what we're seeing here is that beyond those who have been directly flooded or affected by landslides whereby their houses has been affected, what we have seen is that a number of people who were not flooded were still greatly affected by the sheer, derelictions of our systems that were just not used to see our systems going down so easily and affecting all of us. So I think we're in the reckoning phase. And what it has spurred is a great interest for this question. A lot of community association has been formed in the coming weeks as a follow-up to the community responses all across the Northern Rivers. They are now looking for grants and future funding to establish themselves, to solidify what they have put together, at the height of the crisis. So I feel, really coming back to your question, it's work in progress, but it's heading the right direction. And finally, to finish with, what I always say is, nature will remind us. If we're not ready now, we'll have to be ready at the next one. Nature will remind us.
Thank you so much, Jean. And thank you, everyone, for your patience as we're dealing with a few technical challenges there. I now have another question from Beck, which is asking Melanie, if you could talk a little bit more about what groups you've run serious games with. Are they, with schools, scouts, libraries? How do you bring the people into that space?
At the moment in New Zealand, the serious game tools that we have available to us are pitched at, we've used them with adults at this stage, but they can be, I've been told, be facilitated by an 8-year-old, and at an 8-year-old level we can use them. They're designed by our science organisation here called NIWA, and they're at 3 levels. There's the very simplistic one, there's sea level rise, drought and flooding. So for us, we take those into our community engagement events with communities where we're actually aware that that is one of the significant hazard risks for that area. Then there's a more complex version of those. And then at the sort of most complex stage is quite bespoke engagement work that NIWA does in collaboration with communities where they take the actual data of the geography and the hazards and work with that community, or in this case, marae, Māori place of living, and work with them on actually an adaptive pathway process to really confront what the short, medium and long-term impact of climate impacts is going to be for them. And it's a tool to allow us to bravely work out what those adaptive triggers will be and how we will move forward. So they're just another tool in our kite, in our bag, that we as Auckland Emergency Management, as a local government, have. We have lots of other games and workshops and scenario exercises and resilience planning processes, educational resources for schools or scouts and guides. We've just led the redesign of the Civil Defence Badge for the whole of New Zealand for guides and scouts. So the serious gaming tool is just one of the ways that we do engagement, but it's a very effective one when you want to get people's attention, and then if they're ready to have a deeper dive into that dynamic adaptive conversation.
Amazing, Melanie. Where do you have those tools and those sorts of things available online? Where would people learn more?
The resources that we have are available on our website under Auckland Emergency Management, and I'm happy to share more about the NIWA games as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And now I have a question coming up from Paul, and I think it's well suited to John. Are there common issues to deal with and manage between hazards and major conflicts beyond natural, environmental, or intellectual? I think he might have dropped for a moment, but hopefully he will come on again. So I'll let him respond to that question in a moment when he does return. But Melanie, I have a question actually from the Lord Mayor. Do you ever get pushback from emergency management agencies who are nervous about giving over control to communities? What would you suggest if communities do confront this?
We actually have the opposite. We actually have communities, and even within local governments, a desire to hold on to the past, which is quite a command and control, top-down heavy approach. And in fact, it has been a pressure for us to try and get everybody to understand that everybody has a role and a responsibility to play before, during and after an emergency. So in fact, mitigating people's fear that there'll be nobody there within the first 24 hours or 3 days has been part of our process of trying to get people to step up to the plate. And part of that's because we face climate change. We face these emergencies from natural hazards that are more frequent, more severe. And even though there are technical and biological emergencies as well, COVID being the really great example, but the qualities and the behaviours that occurred through COVID are just applicable to the natural hazard ones. And we need people to understand that everybody has a role, everybody needs to be involved.
Wonderful. And it's such great messaging. It's something we've heard so much through this discussion is, that need for everyone to really be involved, the need for us to be really connected in what it is that we're doing. Now, Jean, I see that you've joined us again. Are you available?
I'm here.
Oh, wonderful. Let's go back to the question that you were about to answer around the common issues between managing hazards versus conflicts.
Look, something I have seen is actually similarities in the sense that in both cases, and that has very much inspired me to found Resilient Mind 3 years ago, is the rise of community. I remember in Iraq at some point, I worked in Iraq for 1.5 years, and what struck me is how, one, those who bear weapons are mostly men, not only, but mostly men. And life continues thanks to the women who do all the work, behind the wall, but this is community at work, and it's absolutely not celebrated. And when peace agreements are signed, you can't see those women. Yet this is the actual safety net I was referring to before. School continues in hidden ways, markets happen in hidden ways, health support is provided in hidden ways. So this is something I had found very inspiring. There's always people who rise to be open to do it. It just happened that they decide to take the lead. So these are clearly similarities I have seen. But then I have seen other similarities which relates to really sheer amount of violence that one can occasions. I mean, I have heard stories of people, having to evacuate from their flooded homes, which are absolutely harrowing, or stories, people who were hearing and even literally at the door. So I had heard and experienced, similar, really profoundly disturbing. So I think what brings them together is this disruption to the way we live, but also disruption to the way we imagine our future, the way we have hopes for ourselves, for our children and great children. And then there are also, of course, plenty of things that makes them different here. And perhaps would you allow thoughts on the previous question? Melanie was able to provide some elements of answers.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much, Dean. We were losing you a little bit at the air, but certainly that message around the absolute criticality of the role of women being recognised is something that is absolutely vital. So, Melanie, as we prepare for the disasters of the future, in your experience, how can governments prioritise investment in community-led resilience building and prevention? What financial incentives might be useful in doing this?
I think it helps to have, this sounds so government speak, but it's so important to have strategy and policies, because those underpin how we focus, where we focus, so that we are wrapping around those that are most vulnerable or disproportionately affected when it comes to enabling the best outcome in a response and a recovery. So in New Zealand, we've already sort of determined where we put our focus, so that be our elders or our rural isolated communities, our cultural and linguistically diverse. But then when it comes to the money, that money can be in the form of time and expertise, and it can also be cash through grants to then enable communities to do and build their own capacity, and be that in training, or be that in resources that they need, or be that in artworks that come after as recovery, as part of the healing process. So I can only really speak for ourselves, but the Auckland Council has just agreed to a rateable tax that goes towards climate change. And out of that is going to come a significant grant, we hope, that communities can tap into for their own both mitigation but their adaptive work as well. And then we also have our own budget that we put in to assist communities, and then we also have the makeup of Auckland is we have what's called 21 local boards, and they also have funding grants, and those can cover across those 4 areas I've highlighted: helping people understand the hazard, or getting prepared. So that could be funding first aid courses, for example, so picking up on that psychosocial and that first aid training. It can be looking at how they're going to respond, mapping, and then actual resources, be that defibrillators or emergency blankets or radio technology. So there is a role for cash, for grants, for money from local and central government, but I think it needs to be very clearly aligned to strategies so that it delivers to those that need it most what's going to make the biggest difference. But in terms of collective impact, we do have a place as local and central or federal or state government to be providing that conduit of funds, because we can't expect our communities to step up to the plate without that kind of backbone support as well. So it's really critical. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Melanie. And my final question for today will actually go back to Jean again. How open do you think most local councils are to working with community members in emergencies? And what's the best way to approach councils?
Thank you, and my apologies for the technical hassle. I hope you can hear. And we are going through severe weather here again, so that may explain it. Basically, I think it will really depend on individuals in this council, and Melanie was right about the strategy and the policy. I would say, if you're lucky, you have a resilience and recovery officer or team even, that would be the best, and these would be a good point of contact. Otherwise, you would be in a good position to request it in a way, or to gently nudge the idea of having such a team within council. In all cases, I would say any social cohesion building activity put under the name of resilience is really the first stepping. So this could be a good entry point, if the council is not used to it or even ideologically opposed to climate action. This could be a way of starting the work without having to confront some individuals on these ideological questions. Yeah, I hope that it answers the question.
That is fantastic, Jean, and a fantastic way to conclude and just thank you both so much for your time, for the wonderful initiatives that you are leading, and also for inspiring us about what we can do. Now, I would like to now hand over to a woman who is very passionate about driving climate and resilience building in her capacity as councillor and Lord Mayor. And that is, of course, Councillor Anna Reynolds, the Lord Mayor of Hobart. And so I'll hand over to her to close this evening's webinar.
Thank you so much, Jess. Fantastic moderation, and to Melanie and Jean. It's been just an amazing discussion. I think the question was asked, is community central to future-proofing Hobart? And I think the resounding response from tonight is absolutely it is. It's very clear we've got a lot more work to do with climate change coming, whether we like it or not. We will have to be ready, and we need a shift in thinking. And it was just so good to hear from Melanie and Jean as two very practical and positive practitioners in this work. And both of them have really quite in-depth experience, one from the community perspective and one working more in an agency of trying to build that community resilience, because that's still in its early infancy days in some ways here in Hobart, but we do have a really interesting new project building community resilience in our bushfire prone neighbourhoods that's kicking off this year. And we're also looking at a resilient Hobart team. So these insights from this webinar will be really, really useful for that work, because as Jean said, the community are the first responders, and communities are increasingly wanting to increase their resilience. It is small steps, and we just need to really tap into where that interest has begun and grow that, and hopefully the community will inspire each other. The final message that really came out was there is a role for everyone, and the disruption of climate change and other disasters can be a catalyst for a stronger community. So there can be a positive outcome. Healthy and well-connected communities are our best tool for dealing with an uncertain future. And I really got some fantastic insights, and I hope everyone did, into some really practical ways that we can build that and encourage people to recognise that they do have a very positive and practical role in dealing with these times of uncertainty. So just another big thank you to Melanie Hutton from the Auckland Council. Thank you to the Auckland Council for making Melanie available for us today. It just sounds like they're doing great work, and the team there is doing fantastic work. And Dr. Jean Renouf, with his fantastic work at Resilient Byron. We do hope, Jean, that you don't have another terrible extreme weather event in the next few days. This evening's talk, and again to Jess Robbins for her fantastic moderation, and Elaine Stratford. This will be on YouTube. It can be watched again. It can be shared. So please, everyone who's interested in this topic, please share this really amazing discussion. I'm sure we'll go back to it and the ideas that have come up tonight on many occasions. Thanks everyone for attending, and good night.
Thank you.